The Burning Throne. The year was 1514. The execution of Gheorghe Doja stands out as one of the most extreme and symbolic public executions ever recorded. Gheorghe Doja had led a massive uprising of peasants against the Hungarian nobility, transforming what began as a crusade into a full-scale revolt fueled by inequality and harsh conditions. When the rebellion collapsed, the ruling class didn't just want to punish Doja, they wanted to make an unforgettable example out of him. His execution was carried out in front of witnesses and carefully staged to maximize its psychological impact. Gheorghe was forced upon a throne that was heated until it became red in color, likely reaching over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit upon him being forced into the throne. The Hungarians also placed a red-hot crown on him to mock him as he viewed himself as a king. It didn't take long for him to suffer severe burns upon contact of the throne while screaming in complete agony before dying within minutes. The Hungarians showed no mercy and made sure plenty were in attendance to not only spread a message but to ensure that everyone understands that the Hungarians have control and will not show mercy if they go down a similar route. Every element of the event was designed to reinforce authority and crush the idea of rebellion. What makes this execution especially notable is not just its severity, but how deliberately it was used as a warning. It became one of the most talked-about punishments in European history, remembered for pushing the boundaries of what public execution could represent, and it remains one of the worst public executions ever recorded. Dismembered and burned. The year was 1757. The execution of Robert-François Damiens is often considered one of the most infamous executions in French history, not only for its intensity, but for the reaction it provoked. Robert-François Damiens attempted to assassinate Louis XV, committing what was seen as an unforgivable crime against the monarchy. The response was designed to demonstrate absolute royal power in the most public and unmistakable way possible. Large crowds gathered, expecting a display that reinforced the authority of the crown, but what they witnessed went beyond even the norms of the time. First, they used red-hot pincers to tear the flesh at specific points on the body. Following this, substances including molten lead, boiling oil, and burning sulfur were applied to the resulting wounds, as this combination brought unfathomable pain. They then tied a horse to each limb to fully dismember him, which supposedly took hours. Upon his dismemberment, he was left with only his torso, but he was still breathing. Following this, the French built a great fire and threw him in, where he was burned to death. This execution became a turning point. Even in an era accustomed to public punishment, it shocked observers and contributed to growing criticism of such methods. Historians often point to this event as one of the moments that exposed the limits of spectacle-based justice, helping to push France toward reform in the decades leading up to the French Revolution. Dragged and hanged. The year was 1305. The execution of William Wallace was meant to be one of the harshest and most public warnings against rebellion, but it ultimately had the opposite effect. William Wallace had become a central figure in the fight against English rule, leading forces during the Wars of Scottish Independence. When he was finally captured, the English crown ensured his punishment would be as visible and impactful as possible. Public executions at the time were already severe, but this one was meant to stand out, to completely crush the idea of resistance. First, Wallace was stripped naked and tied to a wooden hurdle, then dragged by horses for several miles through the streets of London to the site of execution. He was then hanged by the neck, but cut down while still alive and conscious. While alive, he was emasculated and disemboweled. Historical accounts state his privy parts and internal organs were removed and burned on a fire in front of him. Only after these tortures was he finally beheaded to end his life. Instead of this execution spreading their message, it transformed Wallace into a lasting symbol. The sheer intensity of the event, combined with its public nature, ensured that his story spread far beyond the moment itself. Rather than silencing rebellion, it helped immortalize it, making this execution one of the most historically significant examples of how public punishment could backfire. Death by 1,000 cuts. The year was 1510. Liu Jin was a powerful Ming dynasty eunuch whose execution is considered the most extreme recorded instance of Ling Qi in history. After his downfall for high treason and corruption, he was sentenced to a grueling 3-day ordeal involving 3,357 individual cuts. On day 1, Liu Jin was subjected to the first 357 cuts. Historical accounts state these early slices were small, like fingernail pieces, and focused on opening up his chest area. Most notably, after the first day of mutilation, he was taken back to his prison cell. Legend and some records suggest he was surprisingly coherent and even ate a bowl of porridge before the execution resumed the next morning. The process continued until he eventually succumbed to the torture. By the time he died, he had endured the full 3,357 cuts prescribed by his sentence. Liu Jin was so hated for his corruption and the terror he inflicted as leader of the 8 Tigers that his execution became a gruesome public marketplace. Onlookers in Beijing reportedly paid 1 qian, the smallest currency, for pieces of his sliced-off flesh. These citizens were said to have consumed the pieces alongside rice wine as a symbolic way to relieve their hatred for his tyranny. The reason for the severity of the execution was because, upon his arrest, officials found a staggering fortune in his home, reportedly 12 million ounces of gold and 259 million ounces of silver, which far exceeded the imperial treasury at the time, and he was also convicted of plotting to assassinate the Zhengde emperor and place his own great-nephew on the throne. This execution remains as one of the most gruesome, long-lasting methods of execution in history. Roasted alive. The year was 258 AD. The execution of St. Lawrence is remembered as one of the most striking and symbolic executions of the ancient world. St. Lawrence lived during a time when the Roman Empire sought to suppress Christianity. As a deacon, he was responsible for church resources and was ordered to hand over its wealth. Instead, he distributed it among the poor, directly challenging Roman authority. His execution was carried out publicly, intended to discourage others from following the same path. According to Christian tradition and the accounts of St. Ambrose and Prudentius, Lawrence met his death by being grilled on a gridiron. A large iron grate, similar to a modern bed frame, was placed over a pit of coals. The executioners were instructed to keep the fire gentle. The goal was not to incinerate him quickly, but to bake the flesh slowly to maximize nerve pain. Lawrence was stripped and bound to the iron bars with chains to ensure he could not move or escape the rising heat. As the metal bars heated up, they began to sear Lawrence's back and sides. What makes this event stand out is not just the punishment itself, but the lasting impact of his response and reputation. Accounts of his actions spread rapidly, turning the event into a powerful story of defiance. Rather than weakening the Christian movement, it strengthened it. Over time, St. Lawrence became one of the most well-known martyrs in history, showing how even the most severe public executions could fail to achieve their intended purpose.